Extraordinary diplomatic encounter unfolds, one that would send ripples through the intricate web of global politics. When JD Vance, battered by relentless criticism for his controversial visit to Africa, stepped off a Boeing 737 onto the sun-scorched tarmac of Ouagadougou, Burkina Faso, no one could have anticipated the bold move President Ibrahim Traoré would make. In those pivotal moments, a gesture would unravel layers of corporate corruption, challenge entrenched global power dynamics, and demonstrate that the most enduring alliances are forged not from political expediency but from shared conviction. What transformed a meeting expected to be a diplomatic misstep into a defining moment that reshaped perceptions? And what consequences would both leaders face for standing united when the world anticipated division? Burkina Faso was not supposed to embrace JD Vance, yet Traoré's actions before a throng of journalists carved a historic moment, and created enemies. The aircraft sliced through the morning haze above Ouagadougou, its engines humming a dissonant tune against the boundless African sky. Below, the red earth of Burkina Faso unfurled, speckled with acacia trees and modest settlements that seemed to defy the passage of time. Inside the cabin, tension crackled like static. JD Vance sat in the front row, his fingers tapping restlessly against the worn leather of his satchel. Controversy clung to him like a persistent shadow. Every major news outlet had dissected his motives, social media platforms buzzed with speculation, and political pundits had all but declared his mission doomed. Hashtags like #Vance in Burkina, #TinhalauToughPlace, and #JTinhalTraoré will not work proliferated, each a digital dagger aimed at his decision to visit a nation most Americans couldn't pinpoint on a map. The irony wasn't lost on him. A man who had risen from the rugged hills of Appalachia to the corridors of Washington was now descending into a country many Western leaders ignored, to meet a figure they often dismissed. Yet something about Ibrahim Traoré's story struck a chord, a young military officer who had seized power not for personal gain but to liberate his people from the chokehold of foreign exploitation. As the plane descended, the modest Ouagadougou airport came into view. Its terminal was functional rather than grandiose, exuding a quiet dignity that spoke of a nation determined to stand tall despite external pressures. Vance wondered if Traoré would even appear. The Burkinabe president had no political incentive to welcome an American conservative laden with his own controversies. The landing was seamless, and as the aircraft taxied to a halt, Vance glimpsed a crowd beyond the security barriers through the small window. Not protesters, but curious citizens, journalists with cameras poised, and a small delegation of officials. A cynical thought crossed his mind: how many of those lenses belonged to French intelligence, monitoring their former colonies' every move? The cabin door opened with a hydraulic hiss, and the warm, dry air of the Sahel flooded in, carrying the scent of dust, diesel, and an indefinable essence of Africa, a blend of resilience and aspiration. Vance stood, smoothed his jacket, and stepped toward the exit. Each step felt weighty, as though he were not merely disembarking but stepping into a moment that would echo through history. The first thing he noticed was the silence, not an empty void, but the hush of anticipation, of dozens holding their breath. Camera flashes erupted like a storm, yet Vance barely registered them. His focus was drawn to a sound, the steady, rhythmic tread of boots on tarmac, growing closer. Foreign correspondents murmured among themselves, their voices carrying through the humid air. "Is this a publicity stunt?" muttered Rebecca Chen from Reuters, adjusting her camera lens. "Does Traoré even know he's here?" wondered Pierre Dubois from Le Monde, his skepticism palpable. "Another white man thinking he'll fix Africa," scoffed Maria Santos from CNN International, her tone dripping with disdain. But the murmurs faded, replaced by a ripple of genuine surprise as President Ibrahim Traoré himself strode across the runway. Alone, purposeful, clad in a military uniform, his young face serious yet approachable, he commanded respect without demanding it. No entourage, no subordinates to shield him, just a leader walking directly toward the aircraft. Vance descended the stairs slowly, each step resonating in the sudden quiet. He had expected a junior official, perhaps a minor functionary sent to maintain diplomatic courtesy while keeping Traoré's hands clean. Instead, here was the president himself, risking his reputation on a gesture that offered no clear political gain. The two men approached each other across the sun-baked tarmac, their movements deliberate. Around them, the crowd seemed to hold its collective breath, sensing the weight of the moment. When they stood face to face, the contrast was stark, Vance in his tailored suit, Traoré in his practical military attire, yet perfectly aligned in their shared resolve. Traoré extended his hand, his voice cutting clearly through the still air despite its quiet tone. "Welcome, Mr. Vance. Burkina Faso honors those who come with sincerity." The handshake was firm, respectful, lasting just long enough to convey mutual regard. Cameras clicked furiously, capturing a moment that would dominate global headlines within hours. But in that instant, both men seemed oblivious to the chaos they were igniting. This was not about photo ops or political posturing. It was about a rare connection between two people of principle, transcending the artificial divides of nation, race, and circumstance. "You didn't have to do that," Vance said as they walked toward the waiting convoy, his voice tinged with genuine surprise. Traoré's smile was slight but warm, softening his serious demeanor. "That's exactly why I did it. In a world where leaders calculate every gesture for advantage, sometimes the most powerful statement is simple human decency." The drive through Ouagadougou challenged every preconception Vance had carried. He had braced for the familiar post-colonial tableau, a few gleaming government buildings surrounded by poverty and neglect, the standard facade of African capitals designed to impress foreign visitors while masking deeper struggles. Instead, he found a city pulsing with quiet determination. The streets were clean without being sterile, busy without being chaotic. Traffic flowed in orderly patterns, and everywhere he looked, he saw signs of a nation rebuilding itself from within. Solar panels gleamed on rooftops, a testament to sustainable development that went beyond rhetoric. Small businesses thrived along the roads, their owners exuding entrepreneurial energy rather than desperate survival. Most striking were the people themselves. Unlike the defeated, hollow-eyed populations he had seen in other capitals, ground down by broken promises and failed leadership, the Burkinabe moved with purpose and dignity. They acknowledged their president's convoy with respect, not the fearful deference Vance had witnessed in nations where power was maintained through intimidation. Inside the armored SUV, Traoré pointed out landmarks and development projects with the pride of someone deeply invested in his nation's progress. "We are not wealthy in the conventional sense," he said, his words carrying hard-won wisdom, "but we are no longer poor in spirit. That makes all the difference. A people who believe in themselves can accomplish what seems impossible to those who have lost hope." Vance's phone buzzed incessantly, painting a picture of the storm his visit was already stirring. Images from the airport were going viral, and the reaction was swift and intense. CNN hailed it as an unexpected diplomatic moment that could reshape African-American relations. Le Monde expressed France's deep concerns about Burkina Faso's growing ties to American politicians outside traditional channels. The Guardian speculated about a new anti-globalist alliance challenging existing power structures. But what struck Vance most was the response from ordinary people. Americans who had never heard of Burkina Faso expressed admiration for Traoré's gesture. Young Africans shared the images with captions about real leadership and dignity. Even his allies back home were caught off guard, their silence speaking volumes about the unexpected nature of the welcome. The presidential palace was modest by global standards, lacking the imposing grandeur many leaders used to project power. Yet it radiated an authentic dignity that couldn't be bought, a reflection of serving something greater than oneself. As they passed through the gates, Traoré mentioned, almost casually, that they would hold a joint press conference the next morning. "No prepared statements," he said, his tone firm. "Just honesty. The world has too little of it, and perhaps that's why everything seems to be falling apart. People sense authenticity and hunger for it, even if they can't name that hunger." That evening, in a simply furnished guest suite, Vance reviewed briefing materials but found his thoughts returning to the tarmac moment. Traoré's solitary walk across the runway had been so simple, yet it conveyed more about leadership than 1,000 polished speeches. Vance had come expecting tolerance at best, dismissal at worst. Instead, he had been welcomed by a leader who understood that authenticity, even when uncomfortable, was more valuable than diplomatic polish. The connection was immediate, a mutual recognition of shared values despite surface differences. The next morning's press conference would be replayed globally for weeks. The presidential press room was packed, journalists jostling for space, camera operators vying for angles. International correspondents mingled with local reporters, all sensing something momentous. The air thrummed with anticipation. When Traoré and Vance entered together, the room fell silent with an almost physical abruptness. No teleprompters, no prepared speeches, no handlers whispering instructions, just two men walking to their microphones with quiet confidence. Traoré spoke first, his voice carrying natural authority. "They say JD Vance doesn't belong here. They said the same about me once. But we do not measure worth by the applause of elites who serve only themselves. We measure it by sacrifice, service, and honesty, qualities that have become radical in our world." He paused, his gaze sweeping the room, locking eyes with journalists and forcing them to confront his directness. This man came with no promise of gain, no agenda beyond listening and learning. That, in today's calculated political theater, is genuinely radical. The silence that followed was heavy with implication. This wasn't diplomatic courtesy, it was a deliberate statement challenging the global order. Journalists accustomed to parsing guarded language were confronted with unvarnished truth. When Vance took the podium, his usual political caution was gone. "We come from different worlds," he began, his voice steady. "Different continents, cultures, challenges. But we face the same forces, media empires profiting from division, corporations treating nations as resources to exploit, and political establishments that have forgotten government serves the people, not the other way around. Maybe that's why this moment feels so natural, despite all the reasons it shouldn't."